I have stayed single by choice, your grace, she smiled, and the Libertine Duke of Vernham fell hopeless. Narrated by the Duke's closest friend, Lord Ashby Cravenmore. I have watched Rowan Ashford, the Duke of Vernham, charm every woman in England. I say that without exaggeration and without envy. He was born for it, the jaw of a portrait, the voice of a man who had never been refused, and a wit so quick that even the women he'd disappointed remembered him fondly. Ballrooms parted for him. Dowagers forgave him. Mothers, despite every instinct of self-preservation, kept bringing their daughters to stand within his orbit, hoping against all evidence that this one might hold him. None of them did. I was his closest friend of 20 years, and I had long since stopped trying to warn the hopeful ones. Rowan Ashford broke no hearts on purpose. He was simply constitutionally incapable of being kept. And then he met Miss Cecily Vane at the Harcastle house party, and I watched the most ungovernable man I had ever known become entirely, helplessly, and permanently undone. It was a Thursday in October when it began. Lord Harcastle's autumn party at Thornmere was the sort of gathering that assembled every person of consequence in 3 counties, and a handful who had no consequence at all but were amusing enough to invite. The house was large, the fires were lit, and the rain against the windows gave everyone an excellent excuse to stay indoors and make trouble. Rowan arrived 2 days late, which was his custom, and immediately became the gravitational center of the drawing room, which was also his custom. I watched him move through the room with the particular ease of a man who has never once doubted his welcome, kissing the hands of the married women, making the unmarried ones laugh, accepting a glass of claret from a footman without looking. "Who's the woman by the bookcase?" he said to me, not looking away from Lady Pemberton, to whom he was simultaneously giving a smile of such caliber that she actually pressed a hand to her collarbone. I looked. Miss Cecily Vane, niece of old Sir Mortimer. She lives independently, came into a small competence from her grandmother, and has apparently decided she prefers it to a husband. Said Rowan. I should have recognized the danger in that single syllable. He only made that sound when something had caught him properly. She was not looking at him. That was, I suspected, the initial wound. Every other woman in the room had noticed Rowan's arrival. Miss Vane was reading. Not performing reading, not the decorative kind where a woman holds a volume open at a flattering angle and glances over the edge at intervals. She was actually reading, her brow faintly creased, her finger moving along the page, entirely and genuinely elsewhere. She was, I would estimate, somewhere past 30 and entirely comfortable with it. Brown hair simply dressed, no jewels beyond a small pearl at her throat. A gray gown that cost a careful woman's year of economizing, worn with the quiet confidence of someone who had decided that taste mattered more than fashion. Plain, some would call her. I would call her contained, the kind of woman whose face only becomes interesting when she speaks, and then becomes very interesting indeed. Rowan excused himself from Lady Pemberton, which the poor woman did not recover from for the rest of the evening. He crossed the room. I could not hear what he said first. I was positioned at too great a distance. But I saw the shape of it, the signature approach, the easy lean against the bookcase, the angled smile that had softened harder women than Miss Cecily Vane. She looked up from her book. She looked at him with the expression a woman uses when she has been interrupted by a door-to-door salesman and cannot immediately locate her patience. She said something. He blinked. That was the first time I had seen Rowan Ashford blink in genuine surprise in my 2 decades of friendship with him. He said something else. She tilted her head, appeared to consider whether his response was adequate, found it wanting, and looked back at her book. I was across the room in 30 seconds. I could not help myself. Not in the least improbable, she was saying as I arrived, still looking at her page. It is simply that improbable and impossible are not the same word, and you have used them as though they were. I used them for effect, said Rowan. Yes, she agreed with a serenity that was somehow worse than an insult. I noticed. Rowan looked at me with the expression of a man who has just walked into a wall in a room where he was quite sure there was no wall. Miss Vane, I said, extending my hand. I am Lord Ashby Cravenmore. I have been Vernham's friend since we were 8 years old, and I can tell you from long experience that he did not mean to be condescending. He is merely out of practice at being corrected. I don't doubt it, she said pleasantly, and shook my hand with the firm, clean grip of a woman who had never learned to simulate fragility. "How good of you to have survived him for so long." Rowan made a sound I had never once heard from him, something between a laugh and a caught breath. She was, we discovered over the following 3 days, formidably herself. She had opinions, not of the decorative kind, the kind women are permitted to have about flowers and music and the arrangement of furniture. She had opinions about parliamentary reform, about the enclosure of common lands, about whether the Gothic novel was a legitimate literary form or a profitable trick. She had read things. She had thought about them. When she was uncertain, she said so directly, which was more intellectual honesty than most men Rowan knew were capable of. She was also funny. Not the tittering, self-deprecating funny that was considered appropriate in women, but genuinely, dryly funny. The kind of funny that catches you off guard and makes you laugh before you've decided whether it's permissible. She was not unkind. That was the thing Rowan kept returning to in the increasingly long conversations he was finding excuses to have with me late in the evenings. She was not trying to wound him. She simply had no interest in performing softness she did not feel, and she had apparently evaluated his reputation, which was considerable and not entirely flattering, and decided to engage with him as he actually was rather than as he might prefer to appear. "She argued with me about Virgil for 40 minutes, he said, on the second evening, staring into the fire. "Yes, I saw. She was right." "Was she?" "About the translation, the Dryden. She was correct and I was technically incorrect." I said nothing. I was watching his face. "She did not gloat," he added. "She could have." "She didn't." "No," I agreed. "She isn't built for it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Ashby," he said. Has anyone tried to, is she?" "She lives contentedly alone," I said with perhaps too much gentleness. "I believe she has been asked. I believe she has declined." "Why?" "I imagine," I said carefully, "that she has not yet been given a reason sufficient to alter her view." He did not answer, but he looked at the fire in a way he had never looked at a fire before, as if it contained a problem he was only just beginning to understand the difficulty of. It came to a head on the 4th day, in the East Garden, during a brief window between rainstorms when half the party spilled outside for air. I was nearby, pretending to examine a stone urn of considerable age and no interest, when I heard Rowan say, with the particular care of a man who has rehearsed this and still is not confident, "Miss Vane, I wonder if I might ask you something directly." "I find I prefer direct questions," she said. I had noticed. A pause. I would be grateful for the opportunity to know you better. I mean to call on you in a proper sense if you would permit it. I am aware of my reputation, and I am aware that you are not the sort of woman who ignores a reputation. You seem to ignore very little, but I am asking nonetheless, because I find I cannot think of a reason not to. She was silent. The garden dripped quietly around them. Then she said, "Your Grace, I am going to tell you something, and I hope you will take it in the spirit in which it is meant." "Please." "I have stayed single by choice." Her voice was entirely pleasant, entirely unhurried, the voice of a woman who had said this before and had learned to say it without apology. "Not because I could not attract a husband, and not because I feared becoming one's poor relation. I have stayed single because I found the cost of being otherwise, the silence, the deference, the slow eclipse of every opinion I hold, too high to pay. I have a house that is my own. I have books. I have friends. I have enough income to live with dignity and enough freedom to be disagreeable when the occasion calls for it." The corner of her mouth moved, not a full smile, but the shadow of one. "I am very comfortable, Your Grace, and I am not susceptible to charm as a general principle." "I see," said Rowan. There was something in his voice I could not name. "I do not say this to wound you," she continued. "I say it because you asked me directly, and I think you are rather better than your reputation, and I should prefer you to understand my answer rather than wonder about it." Silence. "Rather better than my reputation," he said finally. "That is the most qualified compliment I have ever received. I thought you might find it refreshing." Another silence. "Then, would you allow me to at least argue my case?" She considered him with that unhurried, evaluating look she brought to everything. "You may try," she allowed. "I find I am not averse to watching you be improbable." He laughed. It was not his usual laugh, the practiced, social one. It was something younger. "You are absolutely extraordinary," he said. He was not flattering her. He was simply reporting a fact. "I know," she said peacefully, and went back inside. What followed was, I can say without hesitation, the most concentrated effort I ever saw Rowan Ashford put into anything in his life. He did not send flowers. He understood, I think, that flowers were the currency of a game she was not playing. He sent books, volumes he thought might interest her, with notes tucked into the pages at passages he had actually marked. Notes that said things like, "This argument seems wrong, but I cannot find where, and I thought of something you said at Thornmere and looked this up, and you were right about that too." She wrote back, brief, exacting, occasionally funny. She corrected one of his textual citations with a footnote so precise it deserved its own monograph. He called on her twice in the following month at perfectly respectable intervals at her house in town, a narrow, comfortable, book-crowded place that suited her entirely. She received him. Their conversations lasted 3 hours each time. She gave him strong opinions on 5 separate subjects. He gave her some back. They argued about 2 of them. He was right about one, she told him so. He came to see me afterward, vibrating with something I had never seen in him before. "She told me I was right," he said. "Yes." She just said it. "On that point, I think you're right," directly, without softening it, or she just said it. "Rowan," I said, "you are in love with this woman." He sat down very suddenly, as if the words had taken his legs out from under him. "I know," he said, in a voice entirely unlike his usual one. "What are you going to do?" He looked at his hands for a long moment. "I am going to have to deserve it," he said. "I don't think there's any shortcut. I'm going to have to be the kind of man she could rationally choose." "And she is extremely rational." "She is," I agreed. "This is the most alarming thing that has ever happened to me." "I expect it is." He did not rush. I want to be clear about that, because Rowan Ashford had never in his life been capable of patience in any form, and what he demonstrated over the next 2 months was something I would not have believed possible in him. He was simply present, consistent. He showed up at the interval of 1 call every 10 days, which seemed to be what she found acceptable, and he was precisely who he was, no more polished, no more performing. He let her see the rough edges, the boredom he felt at society functions, the genuine and unashamed enthusiasm he had for a well-made argument, the odd and rather endearing interest he had developed in agricultural theory after she had mentioned it once, in passing, as something she thought unfairly neglected. He had read 3 books on it by the following Tuesday. She mentioned this to me, with some amusement, the one time I called on her alone, in what I must admit was a reconnaissance mission on his behalf. "He is not what I expected," she said. "Few people are at sufficient depth," I said diplomatically. "I expected the charm to be a mask." She was quiet for a moment. "It isn't. It's simply the outermost layer. There is considerably more underneath." "Yes. He listens," she said. "I have met very few men who listen without waiting to speak." "He listens to you," I said. "He has not historically been celebrated for his listening." She looked at me. "No," she said, with the faint curve at the corner of her mouth that was as close to open amusement as she usually permitted. "I don't imagine he has." The declaration, when it came, was nothing like the speeches Rowan had made to women before. I know, because he told me afterward, almost word for word. It was in her sitting room. The fire was lit. Rain was making its 3rd serious attempt at the windows that week. She had just spent 20 minutes explaining, with extraordinary precision, why she believed a particular political pamphlet that he had recommended was structurally dishonest, and he had sat there in the chair across from her and watched her face and said nothing. When she finished, she looked at him. "You're not arguing." "No," he said. "You usually argue." "I know." He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees. "Miss Vane, Cecily, I'm not going to make you a speech. I don't think you want a speech." "I don't," she agreed. "I'm going to tell you the truth, because you seem to find that more useful than most things." He met her eyes. "I have been a man who moves through the world taking what is offered and leaving before anything is required of me. I was very comfortable with that arrangement. I saw no reason to change it." He paused. "I met you, and I have spent the last 3 months wanting not to charm you and not to defeat you and not to make you quiet, but to be someone you might rationally consider worth keeping. I am aware that this is not a powerful recommendation. I'm not asking you to throw away the life you've built on the basis of a few calls and a disagreement about Virgil. I'm asking if you might allow me to continue. To remain in the consideration, as a serious candidate rather than an improbable one. The room was quiet. You said improbable, she said. I meant it in the specific sense this time, not for effect. She was looking at him with that look, the evaluating, unhurried look. You read 3 books on agricultural drainage theory. 4, he said. The 4th was less useful. The corner of her mouth moved, then moved again. Then she pressed her lips together and looked briefly at the ceiling, as if negotiating with herself. Then she looked back at him. Your Grace, she said, Rowan, and something in her voice had shifted, not softened exactly, but opened. I will tell you something that I have not told anyone. I have stayed single by choice because I never found a man who interested me enough to warrant the cost. She paused. You interest me. You have interested me, against a certain amount of resistance on my part, since you blinked at me across the Harcastle drawing room and appeared to find me surprising. She folded her hands in her lap with precise composure. I am not promising anything except this. I am willing to be interested. And if you can maintain that without reverting to the habits of a lifetime, I believe I am willing to find out what comes next. He did not say anything noble. He did not sweep her off her feet. He sat in the chair across from her and let out a breath that sounded like a man who had been holding it for 3 months. That is, he said, the most precisely worded encouragement I have ever received. You seem to like precise things now. I seem to, he agreed. I will tell you how it ended. Not dramatically. There was no grand claiming, no scene before a shocked ballroom, because that was not who she was, and she would not have thanked him for it. It ended with a morning call in November, a cup of tea growing cold on the table between them, and her looking up from something she'd been reading to find him watching her with an expression he'd stopped trying to govern. What? She said. Nothing, he said. You look, I was thinking how entirely at home you look in your own rooms, in your own life. I am at home, she said. It's mine. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. I should like very much if you would allow me to be a part of it, formally. He looked at her directly. I am asking you to marry me, not as a general proposition, not as a performance. As the specific, considered, unambiguous request of a man who finds that he cannot locate a reason to want any life that does not contain you in it. She was quiet for a moment. You will have to be patient, she said. I am not easily bent. I know, I find I don't want you bent. I want you exactly as you are. I will always have opinions. Yes. About everything. I am counting on it. She looked at him for a long time. Then she put down her book very deliberately and reached across the small table and put her hand over his. Then yes, she said, I believe I will. It was, given the woman, the most sweeping thing she could have offered him. Rowan Ashford, the Libertine Duke of Vernham, looked at her hand over his and looked at her face and became, as I have said, entirely and permanently undone. I was there for the wedding 3 months later, a small, deliberate affair at a country church, with only family and the friends she had trusted and the friends he had earned. The room was quiet and warm. She walked toward him with the same unhurried, level composure she brought to everything. She reached him. He said very quietly, so that only she and I could hear, You're sure? I made a rational choice, she said. I am very confident in it. He smiled, not the practiced one, the younger one, the one I had seen that first afternoon in the garden, and he took her hand. I have watched Rowan Ashford charm every woman in England. I have watched only one of them make him mean it.